Coming live from Florida, USA is our guest this evening. Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Tom Becker, Ph.D., and he is the president of Stratafy, a talent management firm. And Stanford study has recently identified him as among the 2% of scientists, top 2% of scientists in the world. Welcome to the show, sir.
It's great to be here, Ajay. Thanks so much for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India. And I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from this discussion, and we'll be talking about workplace behavior and talent management. My first thing to understand from you, Dr. Becker, is that, you have worked with a lot of companies, consulted with a lot of companies, large and small, including P&G, Procter Gamble, AstraZeneca, McDonald's, and also the FBI. Now, in terms of talent management, we can understand companies, can have problems, workplace behavior, talent management. They take help of, former security guys in terms of doing that background check. And still, sometimes they can go wrong. What can FBI have in terms of talent management? I am quite intrigued with that. I want to understand exactly, is talent management a perennial problem? Is it a problem with everybody? So that's why I asked for the audience to understand what problem can FBI have with all the resources in terms of talent management. Let's start with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the government, including the FBI, has exactly the same sort of issues with talent management as any other organization. They want to find great people. They want to hold on to great people. They need to manage their performance. They need to compensate them fairly. They need to motivate them. They need to provide excellent leadership. So although the context is quite different, working for the FBI than, for example, working for McDonald's hamburgers, many of the issues that they face when it comes to talent management are exactly the same.
Right. So let's leave now FBI and come to the regular world, and people can have in terms of problems in today's time. Earlier talent management, if you tell somebody, he or she will understand, okay, he's talking about the human resources part and the employee management and all. What should one understand when one talks about talent management? Like, you are the president of the Stratafy, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Yeah, Stratafy. Right. So if what would has it changed? Is it the same? Are there new trends to it? How should a general person understand what talent management today is all about? Is it about employees? Is it about leadership? Because leadership are also talent. And if for blue collar employees, you can have different tools. But what about leadership? How do you help us understand this whole gamut of talent management as you see it?
Yes, happy to do that. First, just a clarification. I'm currently a college professor in the Muma College of Business at the University of South Florida. And I'm on that job until May 5th. That's my primary job. I've always done consulting along the way because that's related to the kinds of research that I do. Beginning on May 8th, I'll be full-time as the president of Stratafy. So what I'd like to do is answer your question directly based on the kinds of organizations I've worked with, and the projects that I've worked on with respect to research. So talent management, to me, kind of the heart and soul of talent management, involves recruiting and hiring, training and developing employees, managing performance, and retaining good employees over time. There's numerous, kinds of considerations when it comes to each of those four kind of primary areas. And as you said, leadership, group dynamics and other aspects of organizational behavior are relevant. But I see those four as kind of the heart and soul of talent management. And I think especially for small businesses, there's a lot to learn because you mentioned Procter Gamble. Procter Gamble as an organization has a staff of people like me, Ph.D.s in industrial organizational psychology, that all they do all day, every day is design selection tests, methods for hiring people. Well, the small business person can't hire a staff of PhDs, right? They have to figure things out on their own oftentimes. So the problem with that is small business owners spend a lot of time trying to grow the company, trying to put out fires, solve problems, and they don't really have the background and expertise to do a great job at talent management. So instead of using the best, most valid methods for hiring people, for example, many businesses, I'd say small and medium-sized businesses, hire on the basis of, let's say, a 15-minute unstructured interview using questions that oftentimes are unrelated to job performance. So I'm not blaming the small business people for that. They just don't know about things like validating selection tests. So this is where college professors or consulting firms can really play an important role, because a large company, again, I'll just say Procter & Gamble since you mentioned it, if they hire somebody they shouldn't have hired, they have a bad hire, or they fail to hire somebody that they should have hired, they can survive that. But a small business with, let's say, 5 or 10 employees, 1 or 2 bad hires can sink them. So yeah, this is talent management to me. And the focus of Stratafy is going to be on helping small businesses do a great job with talent management.
Right, sir. Right. In terms of talent management, now let's look at what is a bad hire in today's time, because there has to be either in terms of performance, in terms of workplace behavior, in terms of integrity, in terms of character. What is wrong in today's time that was earlier right? Because if you try to meet the targets, you got to employ some different tactics. How should an employer look at that, or an employee look at that? Because an employee can be having a lot of integrity. He or she may be with the firm since even as a startup, and then it has grown, and suddenly you may not be a very good employee or very good talent for them. It keeps on happening. We see it day in and day out. So how exactly would one look at what exactly is missing in somebody? Is it on the whims and fancies of some people? That is where you can suddenly become from a good hire to a bad hire. Or is it actually something on the ground? Because every day we see on the top leaders bungling on one thing or the other in one company or the other.
Yeah.
Who is to be blamed? And then employees have to follow orders. They sort of set the tone on everything, and then the employees have to bear the results of that particular thing. A CEO is, for them, it is very easy to find another job. They have great network, management, college network, and alumni network, and everybody. But the employee, he has to only fall back on LinkedIn or a few places. So how does this whole aspect of the right and wrong in today's time, how do you see that? What should an employee understand, especially for a small business? How do they look at the right and wrong of everything in today's time in terms of whether it's a good hire or a bad hire?
Yeah, Ajay, you hit the nail right on the head with respect to there's multiple ways to be a good employee or employer, or a bad one, right? So an employee could be good in one sense, like, they do the basic task, duties, and responsibilities of the job very well, but bad in another sense, in that, for example, maybe they're embezzling funds from the organization. So yeah, what that means is when it comes to hiring people, you need to look at multiple factors. So many larger companies, and I think this would be great if smaller companies did it also, they'll have like a battery of selection tests. They won't use just one thing. They won't just use an interview, for example. So the research suggests that there's several things that most employers definitely should use. One would be a cognitive ability test. And the basic notion there is simply that smarter people tend to learn job knowledge faster. So overall, they tend to be higher performing employees. But of course, that's not all. Another thing you're looking for is specific knowledge and skills relevant to that job. If it's an accounting job, do they have a good education in accounting? Have they got experience and so on? Okay. Now you've mentioned integrity a couple of times, and that's so important. It's hard to measure sometimes because most people put their best foot forward in a job interview. But a few years ago, I created something called the situational judgment test of integrity. And what that is a measure that involves 20 realistic job scenarios, right? So when you're taking it, you're told, okay, here's a situation that you're in, and you read through that situation, and you pick one of 4 options. And which option you choose tells us something about the level of your honesty, your fairness, and other aspects of integrity. So this is a way of measuring integrity. It's not perfect, but it's a way of getting at that critical sort of attribute that you can't get from things like cognitive ability tests or measuring just somebody's skills. And so the study that I did validating this measure of integrity showed that scores on this measure were related to job performance, which is good, but also related to leadership potential and career advancement. So not surprisingly, it's really important for leaders to have integrity because they're in a position sometimes to do a lot of damage if they're unethical. So there's other ways of measuring integrity, but for sure what you want to measure what you want to assess in hiring is cognitive ability, specific knowledge, skills, and ability, integrity, and probably conscientiousness, which is just how dependable the person is going to be. Those 4 things I would recommend almost any company try to evaluate as they're choosing employees.
Right. And so once an employee comes in, including the leadership, how do you look at workplace behavior? Because many a times, everything else is ignored. Only things like sexual harassment and things like they only come to light and people actually notice it.
Yeah.
Beyond that, everything is okay. How should firms look at employee behavior? Also look at leadership behavior, because beyond a simple man, maybe some janitor or everybody else is a manager in some sort of a decision making position. And how should their workplace behavior should be looked at? What do we understand in terms of workplace behavior in today's time? Because almost every moment there is that CCTV hanging above your head. It is watching you. So what things can go wrong? What is bad workplace behavior in today's time if we remove the sexual harassment part?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question because it's become such an issue, sexual harassment, but other things like employee theft. I don't want to pick on a particular organization, but in the U.S., there was a national bank that had very serious problems because of their reward system. They were providing incentives for their employees to open new accounts for their clients. And in some cases, these employees opened accounts without the permission of those clients, and it created quite a big scandal. So this was an issue for sure, first of all, of integrity, on the part of people who were doing something wrong and knowing they were doing something wrong. But more broadly than that, rather than just blaming the individual, which doesn't really solve the problem, taking a look at the organizational system that supports that behavior. So, yeah, and I'll go back to the issue of the reward system and the incentives that are provided. Many times when you look at a particular kind of, let's call it counterproductive behavior, like theft, for instance, you'll find that there are either incentives for the behavior or a lack of penalties for the behavior. So you take somebody, well, let's just take sexual harassment, because that's kind of an extreme example of counterproductive behavior. Why would somebody have a favorable attitude about sexually harassing someone? Well, obviously, in the minds of the sexual harasser, the benefits of engaging the behavior outweigh the costs, thinking of it from a cost benefit sort of thing. Well, the potential benefits, I suppose, are kind of straightforward. The sexual harasser usually gains some sense of power over an individual. It's partly sexual for sure, but it's really at heart an issue of power and domination. So that's what they're getting out of it. Well, what are the costs? The costs are, if they get caught, they might be fired, reprimanded, maybe even have to spend time in jail because they've broken the law. But if the company doesn't have a process in place for handling sexual harassment claims and penalties for doing that, then the benefits are going to outweigh the costs. I know that's kind of a rational explanation for something that's not always rational, but that's a piece of it. The other part of it is the norms of the organization. If a sexual harasser knows that people they care about, like maybe their boss, their colleagues, their peers, their employees, if they know that person or those people either approve of the behavior or are going to look the other way, then that removes a reason for them not to do it, right? In some cases, the sexual harasser is actually surrounded by either other sexual harassers or people that are at least friendly to the idea. I know that's kind of a sick way of thinking about it, but they're friendly to the idea of putting women down or dominating women or degrading women or whatever. So really the norms of the organization, the culture of the company plays a key role as well.
Right. You came up with this good word: organizational culture, workplace culture, workplace ethics. You are the master. You understand workplace behavior. Very few people know the way you know. You teach and you study at the University of Florida. You have been, dealing with this workplace behaviors topic for very, very long. You know a lot about it. Now, if we look at the workplace behavior, there in the recent years, there've been talk about, passive aggressive behavior, toxicity in workplaces. And that is a big thing that has come out during COVID was the great resignation. Now, if you look at it from an employee's point of view, how and what and the role of the HR, the senior management, people say you don't leave leave a company, you change your boss.
That's true.
What is, yes. So what is the role of everybody else beyond the employee, the simple employee who is just there to work? How should organizations make it a better place for the general employee? Because you ask a question, Tom, is that where have all the leaders gone? Where is that leadership? Why is it? Is it that with times when the population of the world has gone up, so there should be more number of leaders, but it has gone down. There is much more lack of leadership we talk today. Why is it? Why is that all we are missing so many leaders in today's time? How do you look at that? Because this is a question, as you take up your responsibilities as the president of the talent management firm, a lot of times you will have to deal with that. How do you look at this workplace behavior in the garb of several other things, and and which is increasing day by day, as as I talked about the passive aggressive behavior from amongst your colleagues, even from senior people within the organization. And most of the time the HR either tries to do something, or many a time they just go with the flow, and as per what the management is saying.
Yeah, so let me address that in a couple of ways, Ajay. You brought up leadership, which I think is so critical. Sometimes we don't think of leadership as an aspect of talent management, but of course it is, because leaders are the ones at various levels in the organization. They're responsible for attracting talent and rewarding it and holding on to it and so on. And of course, like you said, the everyday employee is dramatically affected by the quality of leadership. You asked, why are there so few really good leaders? And that's a pretty deep question when you think about it. There was a set of studies done back in the 1960s now by researchers at the Ohio State University. Happens to be my alma mater, but they're called the Ohio State Leadership Studies. And one of the key things to come out of those studies was that there's two fundamental aspects of leadership that are critical to the leader's effectiveness. There's a lot of other things that are important too, but two fundamental things. And one of them is, not surprisingly, the ability of the leader to get things done, just setting goals, managing schedules, getting stuff done on time and all that. That's important. But the tougher part of leadership, the second fundamental, is people skills. And those people skills, just generally speaking, are things like being considerate of employees, demonstrating genuine concern for human beings, for people that work with and for you. And what we've seen, why great leadership is rare is very few people have the capacity to do both of those things very well, the task-oriented part of it and the people-oriented. You'll find people that are great at the task-oriented. They know how to set goals, develop plans, create schedules, but then, they don't really care about their people so much. And then you've got people that are very caring and supportive of their employees, which is fine. Their employees are satisfied, but the work just isn't getting done, So those are the two fundamentals. And I think the difficulty in developing both of those is what makes it hard to find great leaders. Now, about that issue of passive-aggressive behavior that you mentioned, let's pick a specific example of that. Each of us has not a single level of performance that we're capable of, but a range of performance, right? So some leaders who are sort of non-sophisticated will just label somebody, Becker is a poor performer, Ajay is a high performer. Well, that's a gross oversimplification, because both of us have this range that we're capable of. And the real question for the leader is, well, let's say you have somebody that's not a very good performer, and as a leader that they're capable of much more. The question is, why aren't they performing at their highest level? Why aren't they performing at their optimal level? And thinking about this more systematically gives you a lot more insight than just labeling, they're not doing well because they're lazy. They're not doing well because they're dumb or whatever. That's really a cop-out from a leadership perspective. So let's take that person who's performing not up to their maximum. Why is that? Well, maybe it's because high performers in that organization are not recognized. And in fact, they're just given more work. So I'm the manager, let's say, and Ajay, you're a really great performer, and this other employee is not very good. Well, I've got a new project I need worked on. I'm going to give it to you, Ajay, because I know it'll get done right. So your reward for being a good performer is just more work. You know what I mean? So it's not surprising that a number of people will opt in that situation to not perform at their optimal level. Maybe also their peers don't approve of somebody performing at their optimal level. You know, it makes them look bad. So it's not just the managers or the formal leaders, it's the entire culture of the organization. And if you got a situation, which has been shown many times, going all the way back to the famous Hawthorne studies, that really the people doing most of the management of employees are other employees.
Right.
And if you've got a norm among a group of employees that, hey, we don't work that hard around here because we just get punished for it. You know, we work right here and anybody else is a rate buster. We don't like that. Then you're not going to have people performing to their optimal level. So yeah, leadership is difficult in the sense that you got to do multiple things very well. And you've got to contend with the fact that other employees may or may not be on the same page as you are.
Right, right, Dr. Becker. So in this context, you know, today's time, a lot of real good leaders, a lot of organizations do have good leaders too. Many of them are suffering from, you know, imposter syndrome. Sometimes you can have questions about your own self, and that is very normal. But I suspect there are actually several imposters actually in the name of leadership. And that is where the real problem is. Because if you see, and if I understand, and if I've read it correctly, a lot of those top managers' resumes, they have been, you know, embellished and padded with all those fancy stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Now, is that where the problem begins? And you talk about 4 principles for figuring out anyone. Big organizations can still have that wherewithal to have a bad hire and then go for another hire. About smaller companies, how can they figure out anyone with your 4 principles so that they do not have to they do not hire any imposters and some real good people in their organizations?
Yeah. Let me talk about the last part first, and then we can talk maybe a little more, if you wish, about the imposter syndrome, because that's
Please.
a fascinating topic. Yeah. So what can small businesses do to make sure they're not making too many hiring errors? Let me address that first by saying that it's virtually impossible for any organization not to make any hiring errors. And there's a technical reason for that. We don't need to get into all the details, but basically what it gets down to is holding constant the particular types of hiring methods that a company is using. You can only decrease one type of hiring error by increasing the other type of hiring error. So there's 2 kinds of errors that you can make, right? One is the obvious one of hiring people that you should not have hired. And I say obvious because you can see them on the job. It's like, oh, wow, we should not have hired this person because they are just not getting the job done. We've sent them through training. It's still not helping, whatever. But the less visible but equally drastic mistake is not hiring the great person that you should have hired. And where do they go? They end up working for one of your competitors, and now that's hurting you in ways that you can't necessarily see. So the only way to decrease both of those errors at the same time is to use more valid selection tests. And by more valid, what I mean is means of hiring people that predict job performance, right? If we use better and better methods of hiring people that predict their future job performance, then we're going to reduce both kinds of errors. So that's what any business, including small businesses, can do. Kind of the tragedy of many small businesses is they don't know what those kinds of valid methods of selection are. They just, they don't have that background. They're very smart people. They're very motivated people, but they just don't have that knowledge. And that's what Stratafy, and other very good consulting firms can help with. Now, about the imposter syndrome. I've got a colleague at the University of South Florida named Lisa Penny who's done research on this area, and I won't speak for her, but I will say this, that you see that in almost any type of business or endeavor. In my world of academics, you will find scholars. I have seen scholars who they've got a PhD, they've published stuff in like top journals. They're very bright, they're very ethical, they're very motivated, but they still don't believe that they actually deserve to be where they are. They don't believe it. And I'll give you one example of this. Years ago, I was at the University of Delaware, and I was on a committee with a woman who had just gotten tenure. You know, tenure is basically a lifetime employment contract that a professor gets if they prove that they can perform at a very high level over time, right? So it's something that carries a lot of weight because, you know, if you don't get it, you're looking for another job. If you do get it, you know, you will keep your job indefinitely unless you do something really terrible. So this woman had just gotten tenured. And I said, hey, congratulations. You know, I heard you just got tenured. And her response was, oh God, I'm just so grateful that they decided to give it to me. And my thought at the time was, wow, I don't know, you know, I understand gratitude. It's good to feel grateful for the good things that come your way, but it's not like they did it out of the goodness of their heart. They looked at your record. They saw that you earned that. And yet she didn't really feel that she earned it, right? So that's a good example, kind of the imposter syndrome, that even though the objective evidence is, yeah, you earn that, you still don't feel like it. So there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it's individual, like maybe it's there's some aspect of self-esteem involved, that even though you've proven yourself, you just don't feel like you're worthy. So it could be partly personality. But another part of it is how people have treated you, how leadership has treated you. Are they acting as though, well, you don't really deserve it, but here you go, you know, we don't want to hassle with it. Part of it is social, part of it is family. But yeah, that imposter syndrome, I think, is pernicious in that it's harmful to the individual and it hurts the organization over time.
Right, Dr. Becker. So such a dynamic environment, work environment, you know, which impacts your family life, your future. How does one look at employee commitment? If a company tells an employee, you should be committed to the company, you should be committed to the job, how do we define employee commitment in today's time when in the evening the boss says you are the best employee I ever had, and in the morning you get locked out of the system? Yeah. What is employee commitment?
Yeah. So employee commitment, as I define it, I'm a commitment researcher, as you know. You probably looked over some of the stuff that I published. There's some debate about how you define employee commitment, but basically, to me, it's the psychological bond that people have with their organization. You know, to say I'm committed to my company, or I'm committed to my boss, or I'm committed to my work team. That's saying that I've got a bond. Now, there's different reasons for why that bond might exist. There's a researcher from Western Ontario named John Meyer who's identified three common reasons for this. One is, you know, I've got an affective bond. I've got an emotional attachment to the organization, team, or whatever the target is. Another is a normative commitment, where I'm committed to somebody out of obligation, right? It's not because I want to be, but it's because I think I should be, right? And then there's something that John called continuance commitment, which is being attached to somebody because you feel you have to be, like you have no other options, right? I'm committed to this organization because there's nowhere else I can work, or I'm retiring in a few years and I don't want to lose my pension, something like that. So the nature of that bond is very important. And I think the nature of that bond depends a lot on what's happening in the organization. One of the better predictors of how committed an employee is to the company or to the team or supervisor is how committed the organization is to them. It's a two-way relationship, right? So people, most people anyway, don't just naturally give away their commitment just for fun. It's because you're developing a relationship. And there's a great guy. He just passed away, unfortunately. There was a fantastic researcher at Delaware named Bob Eisenberger. And one of the things he studied was perceived organizational support, which is an employee's belief about the extent to which the organization has an actual concern for the employees. And that's one of the better predictors of commitment. So I'm more likely to become committed to the organization if I can see that they're supporting me. They're doing what they can to develop my skills, to support me as an employee. They actually care about me as a person rather than a cog in the machine. So that's kind of an overview of my perspective on commitment.
Right. So overall, if we look at things, whose job is it to make sure that the work culture and the workplace is as best as possible? Is it the leadership? Is it the managers, the junior managers, the simple employee at work, or the janitor? Tell us, whose responsibility is it? Or even the HR, I forgot to mention, because we have got these fancy titles, CHROs. So I've seen a lot of them, but I just want to understand whose job is it to make sure that the organization is a happy place.
Yeah, you know what? I got to go with the old saying that the buck stops here. Top leadership is number one responsible for the culture. Everybody plays a role. You mentioned the janitor. A janitor can contribute to the quality of the culture of the organization. So everybody plays a role, but top management is first and foremost responsible. Where culture originally comes from, this guy, Edgar Schein, wrote about this in a book years ago, that culture originally starts with the founder of the company, right? So it's the founder's personality and values that kind of get the ball rolling on what the culture is going to be like. If the founder is autocratic and uncaring and only concerned with material things, that's kind of where the culture starts to go. It can change, but the bigger the organization grows and the more the roots of the organization spring into that culture, the harder the culture is to change. So it starts with the founder. And then top management, after, let's say, the founder passes or retires or whatever, top management takes over that mantle, and it's their job to make sure that the culture is one that's good for everybody. One of my favorite notions in the human resource area is the idea of a high involvement, high performance work culture. Sometimes we think of it, or some managers also think of it as either or. Either you've got a bunch of satisfied employees with high morale, or you've got a very productive group of people. And what you find, of course, is no, in great organizations, the two go hand in hand. We know that job satisfaction moderately predicts job performance. In general, this is a very general statement, in general, more satisfied employees perform better. Well, where does that satisfaction come from? A number of places, but again, it gets back to the nature of the organization. Am I treated well? Am I valued here? Am I paid fairly? Am I given challenging tasks? Does my job have meaning and purpose, or is it just some kind of drudgery that I got to do to get a paycheck? So to answer your question, I got to say, although culture comes from many places and can be supported in many ways, it's got to start with top management and filter down from there.
Wonderful. You have helped us understand this whole gamut of workplace behavior, talent management very, very well, Dr. Becker. But this is only a show, half an hour show. There is so much to still learn, and for that, people will have to come straight. So how do they connect with you, Dr. Becker? And how do they learn more about, about Stratafy, and then maybe engage when you fully take over the company in, in May?
Sure.
How they?
Thanks for asking that. I appreciate it. So, Ajay, right now the best way to engage with me for your listeners would be through LinkedIn. I've got a personal LinkedIn page there. As you probably know, you can just go on LinkedIn and do a search for Thomas Becker. As of May 8th, I'll have a live web page for Stratafy. I'll have a link to that through LinkedIn. That'll be a great place to go to find out what our company's all about, the types of resources that we have available for small and medium-sized enterprises, and for any sort of discussion or consulting on whatever issues that a small or medium-sized business may have. Now, I say small and medium-sized businesses. Those are obviously, that's very kind of abstract, but we really do want to work with organizations with between, let's say, 2 and 500 employees. I know that's a big spread, but that's kind of what the Small Business Administration says is a limit for smaller businesses. Other consulting firms are great. I'm not knocking others, but many of the big ones, the ones that people know, I won't get into names here, but the most famous consulting firms, many times they won't touch clients that have less than 1,000 employees. I was talking with the president of a large consulting firm recently, and they told me, we just don't do that because the revenue doesn't scale up so easily. But somebody's got to look out for the little guy, and that's really what Stratafy hopes to do. So LinkedIn is the best place right now. We'll have a Stratafy LinkedIn page on beginning May 8th, and we'll also have a link to the company website.
Right. My last question to you, Dr. Becker, is that you have achieved so much in your life. 30 plus years as a professor, consulted top companies. You have had a good, as recently as a scientist, top 1% scientist, and now you are going to take up this responsibility as president of Stratafy. I want to understand, after having achieved and done so much, what is it that you now seek for yourself?
Well, thanks for asking that. That's a very, very good question, I think, for us to address kind of as we close out here. I'm just going to give you a personal answer to that. When I was young, my father, when he left for work every day, he worked for a large organization. He literally said, "Another day in hell." I mean, isn't that depressing? He's going out to work, and every day it's like, oh God, I hate this, And as I'm approaching an age that is more advanced than, let's just say, 20 years old, my thought is I want to stay engaged. I want to have some inspiration in my life, a purpose that ties to something that I consider valuable. I'm not somebody who would retire and just play golf all day. That's, I'm not saying that's bad. It's just not me. So yeah, this is what's important to me, is to have something like a big, audacious goal in front of me, something to work hard towards that I find valuable. And so, yeah, I think that's what keeps me going, really, is I want to finish my life strong, meaning that, trying to contribute in whatever ways I can. Of course, Stratafy, like other businesses, has to make money to stay in business, but we want to do some good for the world too. We want to help small businesses, in all sincerity. So, yeah, that's what's driving me these days, Ajay.
Wonderful. On this note, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.